With that, I'm just going to go back into some, I don't know, somewhat painful child memories, not too traumatic, but certainly formative for me. We all have childhood memories that are painful, right? Some of mine, like probably yours, revolve around the playground and being picked last for kickball. I wasn't Nick, right? I wasn't the first one to be picked. Other moments of being bullied on the playground. We all, unfortunately, probably have those types of moments too. But some of my worst memories are actually around speaking in public, speaking in groups. I was a shy kid. I was quiet. And going back all those years, it's painful for me to think about that shyness and that quiet because we live in a world that doesn't necessarily celebrate the shy or the quiet, the inward, the introspective kids. I remember carrying this anxiety with me throughout elementary school, junior high school, into high school, even into my early year or two of college. And any of you who have this fear of public speaking, of raising your hand in a group setting, of being called upon, knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? You even reorganize your day, your life, your classes around which one might you be called upon, so you'll sit in a certain spot in the classroom, or you'll avoid, and I remember in high school, certain places in the lunchroom, or choosing or not choosing certain classes in college. I make fun of it sometimes, that the number one fear most human beings have is public speaking, is speaking in front of a group, but I only make fun of it because it's such a real issue in all of our lives. It was in my life for certain. Now, I know some of you are thinking there's no way. He gets in front of us, he won't shut up, right? He just talks and talks and talks. It's just not possible. I assure you it's true. It's not an inborn inclination. It's something that I've developed with Malcolm Gladwell's idea of the 10,000-hour principle. I've worked very hard to be able to speak publicly. And it began for me when I was a freshman, maybe sophomore in college. I don't exactly remember when, but I had great Uncle Bob. We all have an Uncle Bob, don't we? Great Uncle Bob gave me a book, and it's a well-known book. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, probably even read it, because it's a top 100 all-time bestseller, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Right? One of the most, right behind the Bible and a few others, one of the most successful books in history. And in this book, something clicked in me, and I decided I was going to set out, and I was going to change. I was going to overcome being what I would now call an introvert. And in this week's Torah portion, we have a very similar idea. We read about the end of the life, the journey of Abraham and Sarah. Now, they are not introverts. Abraham is the quintessential extrovert. His entire life is spent going out into the world. Their tent is always open. They're always inviting people in. And the man will not stop talking. He talks to his wife. He talks to the Hittites, as Nick talked about this morning, as he's negotiating a land deal, the first land acquisition in Israel, buying the cave of the Machpelah. He negotiates with Pharaoh. He even negotiates with God. Abraham is a talker. He's a speaker. He's an extrovert, as is his grandson, Jacob. Next week we'll read about Jacob, the extrovert, going out into the world, always on a journey, but crouched in between them is the patriarch that we tend to gloss over. We tend to kind of write off because he's more of a in the background kind of a guy, not in the foreground like his father or his grandson. And that man today is, of course, Yitzchak, Isaac. We read about Yitzchak over and over again at the highlight moments of his life being alone or being quiet. In this week's Torah portion, we read, "And Isaac came from the way of the well of Lechai Roi, for he lived in the Negev." What was he doing out near this well? He was by himself, the text says, alone. And what was he doing? He was mourning the loss of his mother. Abraham is an extrovert. When he mourns, he goes to people, and he's around people, and he needs to be around people. That's how he finds healing. But Isaac needs to be alone. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field, lasuach b'sadeh, to talk in the field, to converse in the field by himself at evening time. Once again, he is by himself alone. And what is he doing? He's doing nothing. That's the point. He's just wandering the fields, replenishing himself, filling himself up, because that's how he gets his needs met. Whenever we see Isaac, he's either alone or he's quiet. Last week in the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, right? His father almost offers him as a sacrifice. He's not a child. He's a grown man. And he doesn't say one single word along the journey, not protest, not condoning what was happening. He's just simply quiet. And next week's Torah portion, at the end of his life, you hear Jacob, his outgoing son, with Rivka, his outgoing wife, chattering behind the scenes, constantly chattering, manipulating, trying to steal the blessing from Isaac, or trying to at least draw the blessing out of him, because they are extroverts and he's an introvert. And it feels like everybody in Isaac's life wants him to speak, or does the speaking for him, or talks around him, or talks at him. In fact, his father seems to have no confidence in his son that he can even get a date, let alone get married. So he sends his servant out, Eliezer, before J-date, right, to bring a nice Jewish girl home. And yes, the first one he came across, as Nick mentioned before. But nobody sent out to get Abraham a wife. He seemed to manage on his own, and nobody seemed to have to do it for Jacob. He comes home with 4 wives. These are talkers. These are extroverts. They go out to the world, but Abraham seems to, I don't know if he's embarrassed by Isaac, but certainly trying to push him, or trying to get him to change, to become somebody he's not, trying to get him to become an extrovert and an extrovert, because the world revolves around extroverts. It doesn't do so well with introverts back then, or thousands of years later today. Because today we have the same issues, the same challenges, and maybe even more exacerbated, maybe even more pronounced. I just read a tremendous book by Susan Cain, and the book is called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. If you haven't read this book, you have to read it. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's an amazing book, and it taught me so much about introverts and about extroverts. I didn't even realize we had such an extrovert preference until I read this book. And in it, she brings study after study of how teachers prefer extrovert students. Students prefer extroverted teachers. We design classrooms now around extroverts. We even promote extroversion kind of learning and getting our kids to think in groups and in pods. We design classrooms now around this, from preschool to Harvard Business School. She goes through and shows how we're creating more and more of an extroverted world, trying to get our kids to become extroverts. And it's not just in school, it's in business settings. Now, 70% of all corporations build what's called an open floor plan, an open office floor plan, a fishbowl or an aquarium, or there's all different names for it, but it's about taking away private space and creating communal public space so you can have group collaboration, which is nothing wrong with it, but we believe, all studies show us, that this is the best way, if not the only way. We reward extroverts, study after study shows, regardless of whether it's true. We reward employees, we pay them more, we promote them faster if they're extroverts. We believe that the best CEOs, or the only CEOs, are always extroverts. Our leaders, we tend to pick the extroverts, whether or not they're the best candidate. Look at the vast majority of presidents throughout history. Most of them were extroverts. We believe that extroverts are more likely to be trusted, to be praiseworthy, more likely to hire extroverts, as I mentioned. We believe that they are sexier. We believe they're happier, more sociable, better conversationalists. We believe that they make better salespeople. The problem is, it's not true, right? She brings so many examples of it not being true. But how do we know that we actually promote extroversion and we kind of apologize for introversion? With children, right? We see it all the time, or people in our lives, not just our children. You hear things like, we say it in kind of a derogatory way, he's so quiet, she's so quiet, I'm sorry about that, right? We tell our spouse, don't be so sensitive. We tell our friend, don't be so serious. We tell our children, don't be so shy. Susan Cain quotes a lot of different sources and people. One of the sources, she says, is, all the comments from childhood still ring in my ears that I was lazy, stupid, I was slow, boring, writes a member of the email list called Introvert Retreat. By the time I was old enough to figure out that I was simply introverted, it was part of my being, the assumption that there's something inherently wrong within me. I wish I could find that little vestige of doubt and remove it. She goes on to say, if you're an introvert, you know that the bias against quiet can cause deep psychic pain. And any of us who were introverts know this. As a child, you might have overheard your parents apologize for your shyness. Or at school, you might have been prodded to come out of your shell. That noxious expression which fails to appreciate that some animals naturally carry shelter everywhere they go. Some human beings, right, just need that shell to retreat into from time to time. Those of you who are introverts know just how biased this world is against introverts and favors extroverts. And we see it all the time. But the truth is, like I mentioned before, just the opposite some of the times. Yes, introversion taken to an extreme is a problem. But introversion isn't synonymous with shyness or being reserved or quiet or introspective or being a loner. They can be. But it's also many other things other than that. But anything taken to an extreme is problematic, right? Yes, we need to deal with our pieces of our personality and our makeup that get in the way of us living a whole, fulfilled life. We shouldn't live in fear. We shouldn't hide in the margins. We should deal with shyness if it's overly pronounced or if we're scared of public speaking. But study after study shows that introverts make some of the best students, make the best teachers. Introverts are among many CEOs, believe it or not. They make some of the best leaders. They've made some of the best presidents. They are just as happy, they are just as sexy, just as sociable, well-adjusted, and fulfilled as extroverts. And here's an interesting little tidbit. Introverts make the best salespeople according to studies, not extroverts. You don't believe me that some of the greatest folks in history, some of the most outgoing folks in history are introverts? Here's a list, a very partial list, but a list of self-avowed introverts. Candace Bergen, Ingrid Bergman, Ellen Burstyn, Glenn Close, Audrey Hepburn, Helen Hunt, Diane Keaton, Grace Kelly, Jessica Lange, Gwyneth Paltrow, Michelle Pfeiffer, Meg Ryan, Meryl Streep, Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford, Johnny Depp, Tom Hanks, Sir Alfred Hitchcock, Jack Lemmon, Bill Macy, Steve Martin, Johnny Carson, Matt Lauer, David Letterman, Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, Katie Couric, Greg Gumbel, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, Abraham Lincoln, Warren Buffett, Larry Page, founder of Google, Steve Wozniak, founder of Apple, Bill Gates, Microsoft, Eleanor Roosevelt, Socrates, Descartes, Darwin, Pascal, Newton, Carl Jung, who invented the term introvert, William James, Albert Einstein, Tiger Woods, C.S. Lewis, Martina Navratilova, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rudy Giuliani, Colin Powell, Calvin Coolidge, Thomas Jefferson, JFK, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Woodrow Wilson. The list of introverts, of self-avowed introverts, goes on and on and on. But the truth is that 1/3 of us to a half of us are introverts, not extroverts. The probability is either you're an introvert, or your child is an introvert, or you're married to an introvert, or some of your best friends are introverts, and yet we're surprised by this. Whenever I talk to people, we're surprised by these statistics. Why? Because we pretend to be extroverts. Nobody pretends to be an introvert, right? But we always pretend to be extroverts because we live in a world that pushes us and values extroversion and wants us to be something that we are not. And we fake it until we make it. The problem is, if you fake it until you make it, at some level you're still always a fake. Right? We are supposed to be ourselves. We're supposed to develop ourselves. We're supposed to push ourselves. Again, anything taken to an extreme is problematic, but the extremes of extroversion are problematic. Right? Being too loud and gravitating into arrogance, into cockiness, right? Those are problems too. The extroverted extremes are just as problematic as the introverted extremes. And we cannot and we should not change who we fundamentally are. The truth is, going back 20 some odd years ago, I do have a regret. I don't regret learning how to speak. I don't regret overcoming my fears. I don't regret overcoming shyness, but I do regret all those times that I beat myself up, all those times I tried to unlearn who I was. The truth is, preparing for this talk, it felt like a coming out of the closet kind of a moment. I am an introvert, right? Because when I said that to somebody a while back, a congregant years ago, they had a visceral reaction. They almost got mad at me. You can't be an introvert, right? You speak in front of thousands of people. You speak all the time. It's not possible. You're a rabbi, they said to me. It was a non sequitur. Because I'm a rabbi, I'm supposed to be an extrovert. But in their mind, that's what a leader is. That's what a rabbi is. That's what a conversationalist or a public speaker is. Must be an extrovert. I touched upon a nerve when I said I was an introvert, and I realized that introversion is totally misunderstood. Susan Cain says, now that you're an adult, you might still feel a pang of guilt when you decline a dinner invitation in favor of a good book. Or maybe you like to eat alone in restaurants and could do without the pitying looks from fellow diners. Or you're told that you're in your head too much, a phrase that's often deployed against the quiet cerebral types. Or maybe there's another word for such people, and that word is thinkers. Introversion isn't just all the shyness and all those seemingly negative qualities. Introversion is about thinking, quiet, contemplation, love of reading, walks in nature, painting, writing, intimate conversation and settings, creativity. The list goes on. As she says, don't think of introversion as something that needs to be cured, right? Introversion is not a perversion. Introversion is how some of us are built. Yet, so we need to stop being ashamed for those of us who are introverts. We need to stop shaming introverts into becoming something they are not. We need to celebrate introverts in the way we design our classrooms and our offices. We need to celebrate them for who they are and what they offer because they offer so much. Gandhi was an introvert. President Obama is an introvert. Julia Roberts, for crying out loud, is an introvert. That's good enough for me. Accept it, embrace it, right? Love it. And say it not so loud, but oh so proud. If you are, I am an introvert. And if you don't know what you are, then look on the back of your Shabbat update, because there's a little quiz from Susan Cain's book. If you answer more than not true, you're quite possibly an introvert. So don't go seek out counseling, right? Don't try and change who you are. Always develop it, become the best version of you that you can be, but accept it. We need extroverts, and yes, we need introverts too.